So we have a lot to cover in a very short period of time. I'm going to go ahead and get started as people file in. I hope that's not too uncalled for. You guys ready? Awesome. Well, first, thanks everyone here for investing your afternoon with me, especially since we sort of changed plans a little bit. We moved it, so it was a little confusing. And so my thanks to you, my thanks to the organizers as well for being accommodating. Has everybody had a fun abstraction so far? It has. This is my first time in Pittsburgh, and it has been just phenomenal. This is one of the best run conferences that I've actually had the luxury of being part of. And so today we're going to talk about data trust and data privacy, building apps in a way that we consider privacy in the same way we consider security, in the same way we consider backing up our data, that kind of stuff. And so let's jump right in if everyone's sort of ready. Again, we're going to cover a couple things. We're going to talk about the evolving landscape. But there are two core pieces in the next 30 minutes that we invest together in this room that I want you to take away with on Monday when you are joining your colleagues at work, or if you're in the middle of building your app as an entrepreneur, or your startup. I want to help you understand how we got here, how trust, in my view, has been broken, and how that affects what we build and how we build. And then next, make this a little bit more practical, show you some guidelines and some patterns that you can take, again, to work, to consider as you build impactful applications that matter. So, by show of hands, how many people feel in control of their data online? So, for example, are you clear on what happens to your data when you bank? There's one guy here. I did not expect a single hand to go up, but someone here trusts that they know exactly what happens to their data. So consumer trust is broken. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about myself. I'm one of the founding members of something called the Open AR Cloud. I sit on the privacy working group there. You can learn a little bit more about the OARC, or the Open AR Cloud, at right there, my Twitter handle there. That's me if you want to sort of tweet at me right there. But I focus mostly as a product strategist and product manager in immersive technologies, but these same principles apply to mobile, native apps, web, IoT, any way that we consume information in a manner that benefits the people that we need. This talk is going to be a little weird. It's going to be from the perspective of you and I, people who depend on these services that we need to use every day in our daily lives. And it's also going to be from a perspective of developers in this room, or designers, or researchers, or decision makers, business leaders, things to consider as you are building great things. I bridge that gap as a product manager. I'm multidisciplined, and this talk has adapted and evolved to various audiences. I'll leave time for questions at the end, hopefully. So, let's get started. So, as we said, there's one guy in this room that truly believes, they trust that when they bank, that data is right where they left it. That is not reflected with pretty much, it's not reflective of anyone that I know. And so I feel that consumer trust that suffers from, where data how data gets stored, how long we keep it, actually goes into affecting our bottom line and the quality of our app, our user experience. So we'll talk about that in the first part. And a little bit more about me, and why I think I'm qualified to speak to you today about data trust. I was one of those Google glassholes, as you guys called me. I was one of the first explorers. And in this cropped photo that you see here, the entire row, first row of that conference were people wearing those face computers. I still have mine. I wear it from time to time. Didn't choose to wear it today. I didn't want to stand out. But that entire experience sort of evolved my thinking about data. It actually changed the way I understood. I started understanding that society started renegotiating norms around what we considered our private information versus the services that we depended on, what they considered data privacy. And in my role, I quit a startup and I started a fitness app collecting biometric information in order to benefit people who wanted to live healthier lives. Biometric information is personal health information. And so I quickly learned to be a good steward of user information, personally identifiable information. So that's what this talk is. I'm going to try to thread that narrative, that experience through my startup, through this talk today. That's a little delay. So, it's 2013. I've got my fancy Google glasses, and I'm going to a conference to speak about being the first black person to wear Google glasses and to do something with it that I thought I was the first black person. I probably wasn't. So I get into, I pick up my phone, order an Uber, share my location, hop on, check my calendar, share some information, shoot some emails off, arrive at the airport, go through the little scanners we all familiar with. I enter the plane. And when I sat down, the flight attendant comes to me and goes, "You need to take that off." I go, "Why? Is there a problem?" She goes, "Well, we have a passenger that's concerned about your glasses, and we think you might be recording things." And so after some back and forth, I basically settle on, well, I will take it off, but it has my prescriptions on it. If you notice in that previous slide, those are my prescription glasses. It just had a fancy face computer attached to it. So I'll take it off. I'll put it like this to make people less uneasy. But I just want to mention that whoever's complaining came through an airport. Right? Their information is out there. So I think the argument there was about surveillance, me potentially recording, versus surveillance, every other camera that was pointing at them and collecting information as they walked through the airport from that journey, from when they, checked in their bags all the way to entering the plane. No point in that. But what's more weird was, just to defend myself again, several years later, I would have had to be like the creepiest of creeps, just to stare at this person the entire time to get within my field of view in order to record them. And technology would have had to be amazing, because that tiny face computer would have had to have some technology advances to record the entire time without burning my face off. The point is that it was at that point that I realized that societal norms are changing. People were woke. People were aware. It's like, this is my information, but is it yours? I was just talking to a friend of mine, someone I just met at this conference earlier, and he put it best. He said that with technology, we always seem to get it right the first time. In the 90s, it cost $3,000 for about 15 megs. Oh, sorry, 5 megs, rather, of data. So the entire stack, the way we collected information as software practitioners was sort of built around not storing all that information all at once. We got it right. But then data became ubiquitous. It became very, very cheap. We also found that sort of tempering the volume of data that we got against the variety of data that we got against the volume of data that we got created a competitive advantage. And so an industry was born. It was called big data. And if you were able to find the right set of tools, right, you could, like machine learning, you could basically have an edge on the next company. But that in itself sort of brought that awareness to consumers through incidents, maybe, that I'm going to talk about here in a second, that we needed to rethink how we were treating other people's information, how we either shared what happened when we shared our information, and were we actually shedding information. So I've used a couple terms. We're going to define them. What do we mean by data trust? All right? I trust, from a company standpoint, I'm the startup building a fitness thing. I hope that the value that I deliver sort of provides enough of a value to bring more customers in. But for the end user, trust I want to define from the end user standpoint, my customer standpoint. It is, how transparent is this startup or enterprise or app? How are they transparent with my information? Like, do I know what's happening with that data? How can I temper how much I know with the value that is being delivered? And how do I know that if there is a problem, as there's a high likelihood that there's going to be, that this company is going to do right by me? So we fall into our various fiefdoms. We use the entire Apple ecosystem because we trust Apple. Tim Apple, I believe his name is, comes on stage and says, "We are privacy first. We do not sell ads." So then I go out and buy an iPhone, and I use all the services, and I get a credit card. Oh, well, that data is shared with Goldman Sachs. Oh, it's fine. I trust Apple. Well, that value that Apple provides me, I'm bought in. And I accept the consequence that, that may happen if there is a leak or a vulnerability or a breach. I'm going to go into data privacy here in a second. I mentioned before that we're renegotiating societal norms, and I talked about big data. I'm going to double tap into that. There's a little bit of a delay. There's been a growth in data. We all know this. We shed a lot of information. We use various services. I gave you that scenario where I woke up in the morning, and to the point where I hit the airport, I'd used, different companies had gotten my personal information through my location, my name, my email, photos, my health information if I wanted to get a meal through, Uber Eats or whatever. So there's a rise in the volume of data that I shed. There's a rise in the variety of data that I shed. And there's a rise in the volume, variety, and velocity, in the amount of data and the speed at which it gets to be aggregated by these various companies. We know this. With that rise in data comes a rise, cause and effect, right? A rise in potential breaches and vulnerabilities. And as a citizen, or as a human, if I put a person in elected office, there's naturally going to be a rise in regulations because we put them there to protect our information, right? So The growth in regulations, examples being the CCPA or the GDPR. I'm pretty sure you all got those privacy. We've changed our privacy policy emails, and I'm always wondering what happened, and then what? And then what happened with that? So we put people in power in order to protect us. And so in this room, assuming I'm talking to business leaders, developers, researchers, designers, everyone in between, we at some point have had to contend with how we secure this information, how long we retain this information, classifying the types of information that we have. And we look at that as a chore, right? Sometimes, or it's just another thing that we need to do. Well, I think that's the wrong lens at which we should look at this. I think the positive, the notion that we, the citizen, or the human, the data subject, gives away information to a service for free or paid in order to give us value. That's a zero sum. It's too one-sided. I feel it should be a positive sum. If I, the human, gives a company data, I should have control over that data. I should have context and information as to what that data is going to be used for. I should have the choice as to whether that data should be collected at all. This is some of the principles that poorly written and well-written regulations are trying to sort of bring together. The cat's out of the bag, the toothpaste out of the tube. So what do we do? Jeez. I'll start using this now. So, we talked about data trust. Now let's talk a bit about data privacy. Well, data privacy is exactly what I just mentioned. It is bringing together the user, or what the legal people call the data subject, me, the human, the control, the context, the choice, and there's one more, respect. Like, do you build your applications in a manner that assumes no trust, zero trust? Do you lean on Amazon's AWS services to then just trust that they're going to secure your applications? I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. So one of the practical things that you're going to take away, hopefully today, is designing privacy into, working with your UX team, your designers, your researchers, or even your architects, to bake in data privacy into your design process. And when you're designing it, traditionally there's so many ways to sort of hack at it. You've got the discovery phase, you've got the learning phase, the use, and of course, their goal. I'm going to sort of take that framework and just twist it a little bit. Well, we're going to use data privacy, the definition that I gave here, to sort of walk us through that process. So your first experience. First would be context. What are some transparency considerations that you're baking into your privacy process? How well are you communicating that the user's data how the user's data is going to be used? We get those privacy banners and all that stuff, and they only have one choice: accept. Are we giving an option to opt out of some of these things? And then, how much control do you give the user in order to afford that confidence and that trust that they actually control some of that information? And do we actually afford them with that consequence acceptance thing that I talked about? Like, what are we doing to sort of validate that we respect their data? Or on their side, how do they feel respected by using your solution. So let's dive into that. First, we're going to talk about context. A clear reason why you're using my information. I'm going to use an example. I'm going to pretty balance. Everyone picks on Facebook. But we shouldn't pick on the tool. We should actually consider what's happening behind the scenes there. So you probably heard recently Facebook announced this facial recognition feature. They did some things right. They did some things very wrong. They allowed, so the concept of this feature is they have a Photos app. And if I were to show up at this conference at Abstractions and you were to take a picture, if I were to take my phone and take this picture right now, like a selfie, maybe I should do that, and someone happened to be in this picture, I shared this to my circle of friends on Facebook. Well, I got, the good side of this gentleman right here. Well, he's not in my circle of friends. He doesn't know. With this feature on the Photos app, this gentleman, what's your name? Gary would get a notification, right? It's like, hey, I'm sorry? You don't use Facebook? Neither do I, but it's okay. We'll make believe here. I don't use Facebook. It'd be kind of weird if I used Facebook. Anyway, so, given this talk. Make believe land. So Gary gets a notification. It's like, hey, you were at Abstractions Con because you checked in and showed your location there. We know you were at Abstractions Con. Somebody took a picture of you. Check it out. Do you want to be tagged in it? Well, actually, I'm going to ask a question here. I took the picture. I don't know Gary. Does Gary own that image because he's in it? Show of hands. How many people feel that he owns the image?
He owns his likeness.
He owns his likeness. Interesting. But does he? Did we read the terms of service? I'm going to get into that. So the concept on its face, it's a great idea, I think. Right? But here, we're talking about context. Like, I know the benefit. I see the value. But do I have the choice? Well, if you can figure out the management data settings and read through 160 words, here, I counted. No, I didn't. Control, right? We'll get into that a little bit. But that context leads, if I'm able to understand what that data is, then I can certainly claim that picture as mine. I can download it offline and keep it and put it in my little album on my little server, or print it out and put it up in the room just to show. Google, I think, does some things right and also does some things wrong. Google, years ago, had a band of rogue bandits that were looking very human-centered with how they approached the various services. Some people that had executive sponsors decided to form something called the DLF, the Data Liberation Front. Say that 3 times fast. Well, the DLF had an initiative. Let's just give back that information that we collect across all of our services. Today, that feature coincidentally becomes a requirement. You have to provide context and provide the choice, the control to the users in order to do business in the EU, for example, or with a EU resident. And by the way, the GDPR went into effect last year, but the GDPR didn't start last year. It actually started, 2-3 years ago, in 2016. And that's been they had 2 years to prepare, and no one did. Not even the EU, which is kind of weird. So I talked a bit about some of the opportunities and some of the innovations that you had. Just because you're giving away information, don't feel that not giving context, by giving context, you're taking away, the people are sort of seeing behind the curtain. It actually provides you with new opportunities. People can actually take that information, that photo that you claimed as yours, could actually go to benefit Google in another way. Facebook could actually sort of see some benefits of doing it right by sharing that information and being transparent as to what other avenues that personally identifiable biometric information, but with my face, what other value that brings to me. And on that value acceptance is something, there are two companies that I'm picking on today, and by no means am I endorsing Google on the bright side, but this is very controversial with their timeline feature. They provided a lot of context. They gave you everything. They said, we're going to track you everywhere you go with that supercomputer in your pocket. We're going to tell you later where you've been. This is several years ago, in 2017. I was giving a talk in Maui. I've never been to Maui, but I'd like to relive my steps. Well, I can go to the timeline right now, and I see some value in knowing so that if I were to give advice to Gary, if he was going to the Grand Malaya, as to, what path to take and whether he should just walk or not. Could come up. There's some value there. Let's talk about choice. And by choice, I mean, as a developer, or a designer, am I giving agency, the choice, to my users about, with the data that I'm collecting? And as a consumer, do I have the choice? Do I have the option to opt out, for example, of being tracked? I was looking at, there's something called a right to rectification, one of the GDPR tenets. And I was just doing some research around this talk to try to figure out, can I feasibly go into, this is not my WhatsApp, but don't use that either. Can I go into WhatsApp today and find out and choose to opt out of first find out what information they have on me in order to then choose to opt out of one thing or another. The only option I have is to delete my account. And then I don't even know if I do delete my account, if it's actually really gone, right? So when we talk about choice, we afford first you need to afford the right to access your content and then give them the choice to do something with it. One thing that I've noticed, if anyone went to I did not see Scott Jensen's talk yesterday, but he talked about, game developers and how they influence user experience and how they lead user experience. That's all I know about his talk because he told me about it. One of the patterns that game developers use very effectively that we can take into our apps is something called progressive disclosure, right? Progressive disclosure touches a couple different patterns, like data minimization, and that's just jargon for how much information are you collecting up front and do you need to collect all that information? Or do you progressively get that information? So this is an example. I'm going to this mock-up of a, restaurant app, pizza app, and as a business, I have the justifiable reason to improve my services, right? So I want to know whether that pizza was actually good or not. One way to do that is digitally. You can provide them a survey form, like a type form or a Google form or SurveyMonkey, with a whole bunch of options. Or at the point of a notification or a re-engagement opportunity, you ask them, this little smiley face, did you enjoy your meal? You can just continue to just leave it at that. Well, if you didn't enjoy your meal and you wanted to complain, well, the business does no way to reach out to you to give you a coupon for next time, right? Or thank you if you did enjoy the meal. Come back. Well, then you have a choice that unfurls additional information. And that should be optional, right? Gives you the option of just providing 2 pieces of information. Because all you really need as a business is to address someone by their name, and you need a medium or vehicle to contact that person, so name and email. Nothing else. I gave this talk at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, and right before my talk, I just needed to get on the Wi-Fi. They were asking for my home address. Not sure why you need that information. I just want to give my talk. Let's talk about control. So, that picture is supposed to be Macbeth, right? Because if you have a glass of wine and you want to read the Apple iTunes terms and conditions, that's over about 20,000 words. And no one does that. And that's actually one of the challenges with designing for trust and designing for considering data privacy, is because at this point, you have the cognitive load of a consumer just wanting to get to your thing, right? So how do you design with being very clear about what your intention is with that data? And how do you temper that against getting them to their goal, right? They say Adam and Eve did not read Apple's terms of service. I love this slide. But no one reads it. No one reads terms and conditions except for that gentleman in that, because that's actually why you believe. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to my startup for a second. So a little bit more about it. Essentially what we did was we believed everyone was going to be wearing a face computer or wearing a Fitbit or an Apple Watch in the near future. That you'd go to your optometrist and you'd have a choice of getting analog glasses like I'm wearing or glasses with the add-on of a face computer. So we decided to add to activate the IMU, the accelerometer, in order to track motion outside of steps like jumping jacks and all that stuff. And what's more, you would be able to share that information with a fitness trainer or nutritionist in order to get better, because they could tell that your pace was on point or not. Your intensity was lacking or needed to increase because you could do better, because we could track your heartbeat. And so we would share all this information. So how do you think we sort of solved the problem? By the way, this is a mock-up. We never really launched this until later, until we were just about to sell it. We learned that we didn't really need to collect as much information from our users as we needed. So on the screen, what you see here is just the bare minimum. We are providing we're providing context, right? We tell our end user why we need their name and email, right? Because if you want to sort of save something, you want to be able to sort of store it somewhere. And your email is a unique identifier for us. We want to be able to email you with a little personal, so we need your name. And we want to secure it through a password. We provide you, this thing is not working too well. We provide you with the choice, or the control here with our privacy settings. We do not have that little thing at the bottom that pops up. What we do have is, this is our terms of service, right? Broken up, easy to read. You can click on it and get the legalese, but it's written to be plain English. And you choose to accept it. Unfortunately, if you do not accept the terms and conditions, you cannot use the app. Why? Because I have a justifiable reason to protect my company in case of an issue. What I can give you the choice is my cookie policy or my marketing initiatives, right? You can choose to decline that. That leads us to respect. The assumption that we want to afford that consequence acceptance thing that I talked about in order to increase trust. That data is secure at the point of storage all the way while it's in transit and when it's on my device. That we're doing something to afford both visually for the user and on the back end, right? So there are going to be some concepts, and we have Anne Kevorkian, we have the Canadians to thank for the privacy by design principles. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But zero trust is the assumption that Amazon, the web host, or the services that we're using aren't going to be secure enough. And we're not going to end up with a Capital One breach. For those Americans that are familiar with the company Capital One, they lost a lot of information. That was personal. And unfortunately, with a lot of these vulnerabilities and breaches that happen, I fear that, and the reason why I'm giving this talk is that I fear that we're at the point where we're just giving up. We feel that the data is all out there anyway. So we do have an opportunity. It affects our bottom line, I can talk about in a positive way, to innovate around building that trust up again with our apps. I'll give you some examples and some new innovations in this space to sort of afford that respect and build that up. Apple recently announced that they were using something called differential privacy on their apps, and that they had the justifiable reason to improve their applications, but there was with this differential privacy technology, there was no real reason to share that Gary, the only name that I know here, sorry for picking on you, Gary was using iTunes, or name the app. What differential privacy does is, at the edge on your device, sort of adds some noise to your solution, to your data set, and securely sends it in transit to Apple servers, classifies it in a specific area that it needs to sort of help focus on. And they've seen some satisfactory trade-offs as to getting all the information they need to improve that piece of the application without treading on your name, email, and location information, as it were. We see a lot of examples of differential privacy today. Actually, most of Google and Microsoft's and some of these larger firms are using differential privacy today. You know those little suggestion chips, those quick replies in your app? Well, there's no real need to sort of pipe that to, append my photo, for example. That has nothing to do with anything. But if you have that notion that data is ubiquitous, it is just a commodity, you'll just collect as much information because the volume of data tempered with the variety of data, tempered with the velocity of that information gives me a competitive edge. I don't know what the folks, and if anyone here works at Grammarly, I don't know what they do in the back end, but I would imagine that they would also, Grammarly, by the way, helps me not embarrass myself when I send emails. Just a plug-in and sort of checks my grammar and checks my spelling. Well, they don't need my information in order to improve their application if that's their goal. So I'd imagine that would be a great use of differential privacy. There's more on differential privacy. I link it at the end of the slide. Definitely look it up. Type in Apple differential privacy. I think they did a really, really good job. Facebook also uses differential privacy now. They've done a white paper on it. I talked about privacy by design principles, and they're pretty basic things that we shouldn't wait until we're in trouble, until the GDPR dropped, to send 1 million privacy has changed emails to our customers. We need to be more proactive with that. They're not collecting my personal information, I promise. I hope. It doesn't. Okay. Right? That privacy is a human right? Again, we talked about control, context, choice, and respect. I'm going to sort of have you just take some time for you to sort of ingest some of these policies here. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. But on the choice piece, I have a story to help wrap this talk up. This is my daughter. I did not ask her consent to take this picture. because she's 4 at the time of this picture. She goes to kindergarten. She's actually going to start in next week. And this was in preschool, pre-K. She's put in the care of teachers, a principal, to feed her teacher and show her a good time. That is the agreement. It's a school, right? But if the school wants to do something else outside of the bounds of that standard agreement, they come to me, right? I'm the dad. I mean, there's no controversy about that. If you want to, if the school wants to take her to the splash park or King's Dominion or Disneyland or just to the swimming pool, the library, they ask permission, and I say yes or I say no. That is the lens by which I look at data trust and data privacy. It's my data, right? If I give my information, my name, my email, and everything else that Facebook has on me, that's fine. It's a zero-sum game today, but I have an expectation that I gave up my face to that facial recognition thing in order to get the value of being notified that I was in some picture that I didn't know was taken, right? If that picture is then sent to law enforcement for another value proposition, they should come to me. I am the data subject. I own that data. So you were right. But we have to fight for that. So, we talked about data privacy and data trust. Again, just to double tap, the sum of data transparency, how much context you provide, with value delivery, combining that choice and context, with that respect, that consequence acceptance, right? So this talk is actually not to teach you about data privacy because we know we're just trying to, we're still in the middle of renegotiating these norms. But I'm hoping that when you walk into the office on Monday and you're given an anti-pattern or an unethical choice or the thing that we've always done because that's how we do it, that we're armed with information as to where we want to go as a people around our data. That's it.